So there you go. Okay, folks. Look, good afternoon. It's Pete Filet here, and welcome to everyone who's registered and joining us today for this water chat. It's a we're planning a series over the next 4 months of looking at different colleagues in different roles, or what we call the water modelling pipeline. So we're just trying to understand today, in terms of decision makers in the water policy space in government, what it means in terms of dealing with some of the issues they have, and more importantly, some of the key information and how they might interact with us as colleagues who sit in this broader space. And look, from the outset, let me acknowledge the, the, the traditional owners and on whose land I sit here in Brisbane, on the Jagera and Turrbal people. And can I also acknowledge the varying lands where you sit as well. So you'll be hearing more throughout the series also about how some of our activities are trying to look at the cultural values of water and the importance of some of the co-design and engagement with some of our First Nations colleagues, and building more and more into some of our water initiatives, which is a really refreshing approach. Look, today, our guest Steph Hogan had just a slight little glitch in terms of definitely wanting to be available and keen to be involved, but just at the last minute she had to be in air. So we've taken the liberty to pre-record a conversation, but online, and they're going to give us a wave in the moment. We've got Michelle Bourguignon and Joel Bolzanis, and both Joel and Michelle, who are part of Steph's team, they're going to be taking some of the questions from you at the end. So unfortunately, the first bit's not live, but it's definitely a good recording. But as we're going along, really keen for you to throw up any comments and chats as we go along. And we can use that then to sort of come together to develop a bit of a Q&A and clarification towards the end. So I'm just in the process now of opening up a video that I worked with Steph. So it goes for about half an hour, and hopefully all going to plan. It's coming up on your screen now. There we go. And so it's my pleasure then to share this recording I did with Steph just last week.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
Good, thanks. Folks, so here's our guest for today, Steph Hogan. Steph's the Executive Director from the Strategic Water Initiatives in the Department of Regional Development, Manufacturing and Water, or as I was just talking to Steph, the Department of Water.
Yeah.
Cuts to the chase. And it's great to have Steph here as our first guest in the Water Chat series for this first half of this year, the Queensland Water Modelling Network. And it's been nice to look at this concept of the water modelling pipeline, whether it's modelling, but it's a pipeline of different roles. And starting with Steph today, what we're really trying to understand is how, in your role, Steph, you've got a big team behind you in the Strategic Water Initiatives. You've got a whole range of different things you're producing. And one of the things we're going to talk today is maybe about the Queensland Water Strategy. It's sort of a recent initiative. But how does this come together, given that we've got a wealth of other water practitioners out there, both your own colleagues within government, but in terms of some of the research, the consultants, the stakeholder groups, there's a lot of information that comes together to allow you to formulate what you think is a way forward into the future. So
yeah,
I was hoping we could explore that today.
Yeah, no, that sounds a good and relevant set of topics for what Strategic Water Initiatives gets up to and how we go about the work we do, and how we are quite reliant on the people around us, not just having a really good team back here in the office, but the partnerships, the scientists, the community members and industry are all really key to us getting some good answers that are long-lasting answers, not just ones we cook up at our desks.
No, look, that's fantastic. And we'll put a link up in the chat about the strategy, because one of the interesting things when you look at the strategy, and I thought was really interesting, is that you had a whole series of principles here on decision making. So, I think we could do a whole series of talks just on these principles that are in here. But I think the role of information, the role of partnerships, the role of engagement, the consultation, recognizing the breadth of values too. It's very broad. So I suppose from the outset, I'm flagging your team and yourself and your role covering a breadth of issues.
Yeah, and I guess having some grounding in science is helpful. That's my background, is a science background, but equally, having some skills around engagement or some resources around engagement are so critical in terms of trying to connect science, which can often be lost in the tech words and stuff like that. Trying to translate that into something that resonates with people who aren't living in that language but might be living in another language about what they're seeing on country, in their irrigation paddock, in their town. It needs to sort of bridge that divide. So shout out to our comms teams behind the screen here, taking the video. They play quite an integral role at that back end to make sure our science isn't black box stuff. It's stuff that people can understand.
Oh, look, that information digestibility, if we call it that, is, I think it's a challenge for everyone who's watching today or listening in. I think it's behoves us all to know how to do that. But I think just another little caveat and context is that in your role, working in government and also as a sort of in the sort of strategic initiatives and maybe as a sort of the owners of the strategy, you've got a few key stakeholders. You've got a minister within his government who's looking at progressing some of this. You've got a whole range of industry stakeholders who have a range of different views. The door and partnership with Indigenous colleagues is really strong. So you've got a wealth of other people you're having to work alongside this. So, and I suppose their role in making some of the decisions is also quite real. So I think one of the things I want to say from the outset is colleagues looking to you as a government colleague, you as an individual take things so far, and I suppose you're trying to give the best set of options forward to some of the, say the political decision makers.
Yeah.
And I suppose how you source that must be interesting.
Yeah, and it's quite a bit of a matrix around how different streams of information come together. So you might have, a real policy issue that might be hitting out in a community, and you want to understand what's going on for the community about that. But there'll be some other interests that might not be the people presenting the issue, but in trying to solve a problem, you need to understand what the impacts are around, what a third-party impact might look like. So if we're talking to farmers or towns, we also need to make sure we're understanding of what the impacts are for First Nations peoples, the cultural values, the environment and the environmental values, as well as the positive economic and employment opportunities that might come off things. So you sort of have all streams of work that kind of sit under that, which might be hydrologic science, starting with monitoring information, and most often we would progress that into some sort of modelling piece to really understand what the flow situation is and give us a platform to test different scenarios, throw some climate lens over the top and projections to sort of see, well, what are the risks under different climate change circumstances. We'll need some economic and demographic information about what the community looks like, what the economic output is from particular things, and try and piece those different streams of science together. We need to sit and engage with community about what it is they might be looking for, and that's when our options start to formulate about, well, what are the things people have been thinking about in the back of their minds, like if only this was different, what would this was different look like? And that's where we start to sort of formulate the starts of some options, and it starts to give us something to use in scenario development. So all of those things kind of come together.
Yeah.
And when it sort of connects, sort of not just at that local level, but starts to become a bit more of a regional or statewide issue, our peak body stakeholders, you know, the Queensland Farmers Federation or Local Government Association of Queensland or whoever it is, that's when that really sort of statewide position and thinking starts to formulate through those organisations.
No, look, and I think I suppose it's a contemporary way in which government operates these days, and, you know, not just here, but around the world, talking and sort of collaborating. But I think we were talking about, like, there's no shortage of water initiatives that are happening and policies, but we thought what would be good today is to maybe use the Queensland Water Strategy, which came out in the second half of last year, as something to work towards, because I suppose, like, it's nearly like it's like your pathway. You know, there's 4 major themes of work that you're doing in terms of, you know, waterways. There's the engagement and partnership with First Nations, the whole economic piece, and then I suppose the water supply, water security thing.
Yeah.
So in all of those areas, then that I suppose in trying to understand how you can formulate and respond, there must have been a whole profile of information that you had to start off with that. Like, it's...
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of knowing what you're... Like, some of this work has been happening for many years now, but okay, for 22, 23, when you're starting to do this, so what was it that gave you a sense of, in terms of information or current status of where we were with some of these initiatives?
Yeah, so... so the Queensland Water Strategy sort of started out as a review or evaluation of how the Queensland Bulk Water Opportunity Statement was going. Okay. So that was sort of a 5-year, it was reaching 5 years, maybe even into its 6th year. And it served a really good purpose at the time, which was a focus around how do we make the best use of the bulk water supplies that we've got, but identify what it is that they are and how we might sort of go about sort of stimulating markets and things like that, and what would we do about sort of new bulk water opportunities. Whereas I think the world, you know, we were already sensing the world was moving on, which was a real sort of trigger for looking at the relevance, I guess, of that document. Yeah. So climate change was a far, you know, since the first Queensland Bulk Water Opportunity Statement, we've amended the Act to include climate change, cultural values and outcomes in water planning. So even those step changes in our legislation were significant in their own right. A lot has emerged around urban water and urban water security, quality, reliability and all that sort of stuff has emerged. We've got new industries, critical minerals and stuff like that. We've also got green energy options. So there's so much that's going on that said to us, hey, we need to sharpen this up and bring it into this new generation of what the policy issues and initiatives really are for water in Queensland. And then when we took that to our major stakeholder engagement forum, it's called the Water Engagement Forum, where we've got about 20 different organisations, a couple of those I mentioned before, where we all sit around and really explore the policy things that are right in front of us. But we took this concept of how do we refresh that Queensland Bulk Water Opportunity Statement into something that is more relatable today. It really, we were hearing the same back. Hey, these are the things that are really hitting us. These are the initiatives that we're all working on. And when we started to map all those policy issues, initiatives together, they did align with those 4 streams, those 4 focus areas. So around, you mentioned the waterways, so healthy waterways, safe and secure water supplies, economic development, First Nations, water interests and partnerships. So they fell into those streams quite naturally. And it wasn't just work we were doing, it was work industry and partners were doing themselves. So this was a way to now say this is how we can talk about this and this is how we can start to think about partnerships together. So it really was about how do we create a document that talks to everyone today, but also is a really good platform to going, I'm going to pick up the phone and talk to whoever and say, hey, I think we can partner on this initiative. Let's see how we can make this a more meaningful outcome.
No, I think what's interesting for me as I listen to that approach is like, as best as you can, this term mapping is, to me, it's a bit of a code of trying to understand the system
Yeah.
as best as you can. And sure, you're coming through a water lens, but you're also coming from a use lens in terms of, I suppose, the human uses, but then because you've also got a perspective on waterway health and the ecology,
Yeah.
then you're looking at the environment and now cultural values in terms of First Nations perspective. So there's a whole system. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty rich jigsaw.
It is, yeah. And underneath all of that, no matter which lens you look at it from those different focus areas, we had universities and
Okay.
an International Water Centre was there as well to give that sort of connection back to what's happening at the forefront
Okay.
of some of those innovations and thinking around science and new science. So that was a connection to, I guess, that sort of not specifically themed, but a way to sort of connect to technology and the future.
And look, the future, and the one thing that I know has come up, it's one of the questions that someone had also raised, the whole forecasting now with climate change,
Yeah,
what does it mean and how does it look? I suppose it's nearly like you can have some base profiles of what you think the future might be, but now we need to add this extra bit of variability. So and I'm aware that within your own group or within the department, you've had a few champions trying to go through the process of how do we accommodate this sort of variability and best trying to deal with sort of what the options might be. Like, has that been a significant investment, I think?
yeah, and both a significant investment from probably the policy and planning work. The
Right.
legislation framework has changed
Yep.
in the way that I mentioned before. We've got specific people that work on that both here
Yeah.
and over in the Department of Environment
Yep.
and Science and Innovation. We've got the Queensland Water Modelling Network, which really sort of leans in to go, well, what's next in the science as well. But also, I think what's really shifted more than anything else is, I guess, a bit of an external authorising environment to talk about climate change, because at one stage there was still quite a level of is it real or not out there, and I think now there's a lot to say that people have moved on from that, and looking back to government to sort of say, well, what are we doing now about adaptation and sort of what are some of the tools and flexibilities that can support. And we're seeing sort of industry really sort of paving the way in a lot of areas, to be honest. And I think we're sort of looking to see, well, what role can policies play in continuing to facilitate adaptation and adjustment and mitigation response to climate change, particularly around water availability. So I think everything from changes in crop types, varieties, seasonality, the way people take water, no matter what industry that's for, how they store it, how they use it, the efficiencies that they're applying and the innovations around that. All of that has adapted and changed along the way, and I think we'll only see more and more of that, and science needs to kind of keep up with what that means for the profile. So,
Like it is interesting, isn't it? I've an old uni friend who's a wine grower, and he's basically saying how over the next couple of years he's putting a whole set of new varieties in. And some of it's to do with moisture, but some of it's also to do with temperature.
Temperature and evaporation.
So it's interesting because I think sometimes these insights are together with some of the, I suppose, users, people on the ground that are doing these things. So I suppose the role of science information is only as good as how you can apply it to certain settings. So
that's it.
It is interesting to see how that collaboration's happening. And then you've got groups like the regional NRM groups who are busy trying to find ways to look after that stewardship for, because another question that's coming through is this might have a water focus, but what does this mean for sort of land land stewardship as well, because the two sort of go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And I think it's sort of easy when we talk about water modelling to sort of get caught up in volumes and the patterns and stuff of hydrology. But ultimately, they also do have that footprint on the landscape and how that interacts. And so the changes in amongst hydrology off the back of climate change has also got implications for what changes on the ground as well. More inundation, less inundation, changes in timing, which will then, no doubt has those implications also for what happens with flora and fauna off the back of that. So, I think we've still got quite a lot to learn. The science has come so far, and I think the community discussion about it has moved on. But what happens now from here and how we then integrate all of that into practice,
Like for your team, and you've got an interesting little team working with you on this, and I know from time to time you commission interesting work from people, but I suppose one of the things, having been a scientist myself in the past, like we can come up with really good technical information now and then, but we come up with a lot of good data. And the challenge is then how do you actually turn it into information that's sort of digestible? Like is that something that you try and encourage some of the providers of that information, or you work hand in hand? Like how does the team come to grips with that? Because it's
I think the best way is always hand in hand, because each time there's a conversation, people that are doing something in science, data and information, will learn from the questions that we might be asking around planning and policy. But equally, when we're hearing back about what models or scenarios are saying, there's also then a further understanding of the people that are then communicating that on to decision makers, a much better understanding. And that sort of is where you start to, demystify how science can inform rather than confuse. And I think we've probably really got better at that. And by we, I mean everyone. I think even out there, whether it's the private sector, universities, ourselves, or the Department of Environment and Science and Innovation, I think we've progressively got really much clearer and better about that because of the value that we see. Because I guess unless we sort of have that on-ground buy-in from the community, this issue will pop up again because we didn't quite nail it. We didn't quite understand, or we didn't quite communicate properly, and therefore it doesn't have this traction and longevity around the policy position. So the more everyone owns it, I guess that's ultimately co-design gets you there. But the more everyone owns the problem and understands it and then owns the outcome, the more likely you are for that to sort of live on.
But from you, like when I was setting up this series, like we've got a few other people. We've got Mal Shepherd going to be talking from Sunwater.
Oh yeah, Mal.
It's good. And then we've got a model of a huge experience, John Ruffini, coming on. And when I told John you were talking, he goes, she's been part of the team once before here. So I think one of the interesting things here is just from a personal perspective, like in your own career, like some of the things you talk about are really, to get that relationship with stakeholders. But if you go back in time, you were there as, one of these sort of science boffins or water planners having to go out. So you've had to experience that challenge of the great Queensland water model, it's had different names over the years, but dealing with these scenarios, like, do you think that's been, having had that hands-on experience?
Yeah, look, it's been amazing grounding for me at each step of my career, having come through science and the research aspects, and then sort of being in a policy support role, and then progressing into running my own projects, planning and getting out there and talking to people and then bringing that back. That's sort of evolved over time, and what I do find this industry does really well is really share knowledge and experience and really coach people through, and that's probably why I've been in that career for 24 years now, because it's at each step I've learnt something new, I've tripped and fallen along the way, but someone's always picked me up and said, look, it's okay. We know you didn't mean it that way. You said the wrong word. It's offensive. Never say that word again, you know. So you learn how to speak to different types of people in a way that resonates, and it's so important. So I've really appreciated, the effort that people have put in me and industry has put in me, and sort of, me being a better person today for having that.
Look, and I think it's a nice reflection in terms of our audience today. Like, I know we've got quite a breadth. There's quite a few people from local government, state government, quite a few consultants, quite a few research, even a few people from interstate. So I think we all, in terms of this concept of the water modelling pipeline, we all sort of sit along different parts of that, that collective of effort. So, and you've had the opportunity to experience a few of those different roles.
Yeah.
But what sort of message can you sort of flag to our mixed audience out there that what they do is important? Because I think from what you're saying, everyone has a bit of a contribution in their different roles, and or maybe in a practical way. So how does the team sort of access that sort of that collaborative effort? What does that look like in bringing the strategy together? Were there some tasks that made that sort of collaborative effort necessary?
Yeah, look, I think that was an effort sort of led from within one team, because you always have to have someone that's got the timeline and responsibility for delivery. So we had a good person leading that piece of work, very enthusiastic and energetic about it, and that's a key ingredient to getting anything done. Is to have someone that's passionate and committed about that. So, but then we did need to rely on, we did need some industry engagement there. So there's a forum sense of bringing that partnership together around that. We did need some external support to be able to make that happen, and to produce something that was just a little bit different, that might sort of resonate with people in a different way than the Queensland Bulk Water Opportunity Statement did. So a real piece around how do we best communicate what it is we're talking about. So you'll notice in this document it's 20 pages long, I think it is, whereas QBOS or Queensland Bulk Water Opportunity Statement was more like 100 pages, lots of text. This is far more trying to cut to the chase on some key messages and opportunities. So a different approach, and that meant we needed to take a little, a less technical report-based approach to it. So that there were those aspects to it. When we're doing other pieces of work, though, as well, we didn't sort of engage too much with any modelling or science in this perspective, because it was really engagement partnership piece. But there are other pieces of work that we do where we might either procure the services of Department of Environment and Science as our state modelling service there, or we might go to an external provider where we might need some economic advice around something, or we might need a particular business case developed that sort of optioneers some things that we can then take some proper documentation costs back to community or back to government. So we do procure the services of the private sector quite a bit in our work for some very specific expert advice.
Because it's one of the interesting things in a lot of the work that we do, in the end, and I suppose this is where underpinning some of the modelling or analysis, it's really about options, isn't it? In the end, or in the planning stage, like before we get to a true commitment of where some of the priorities are, it's really understanding the pros and cons of different ways.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess all those pieces come together when you've got the governance sort of right. I know that's a bit of a boring governance, but it really is just a way to describe how you bring people together.
Right.
So at different sort of levels, whether it's about people that are in those leadership positions, coming from different angles, really trying to drive the project with some guidance there, through to people that might be in a working group, where providing all that technical input and trying to make the pieces work together a little bit. And so the more that those people can talk together, the more integrated that science, economics starts to talk to water science, starts to talk to First Nations knowledge. So it all sort of integrates a bit better when we're all in the room.
Yeah. Like I can't help the sense that the communication is critical, but I suppose it's nearly like science literacy is
Yeah.
an issue. And I think for the broader audience, it's interesting to know how they find they can do that transferableness. Here I'm using clunky language myself.
Transferableness. Yeah, let's
like
go
how
with
do
it.
you digestible? Like, what's it mean? What's it mean, and how can I use it?
Yeah.
I think that is one of the interesting things, which I think is part of the nice thing with looking at some of the cultural values flows. Like there's a whole new language there too about understanding the on-country and in waterways from a First Nations perspective. So there's some healthy learning there for the non-First Nations people to sort of be able to work alongside.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that we're always trying to keep in mind, and this is absolutely an area of learning, is about that knowledge and how it's shared. And it's shared with 65,000 years of knowledge being passed down generation to generation. So there's a spiritual nature of the knowledge. So sharing that with someone is really something to be respectful of and to recognise and get consent and permission around the use of it. And so it does have a very different angle to it. And that's that's why some of the work around how do we bring cultural knowledge and hydrologic modelling, how do those two things come together? And I know there's a couple of pieces going on about how we go about that, but intellectual property around information, consent, and then how that is communicated publicly when it's not owned. It is knowledge of traditional custodians. So how does that all play out is something that I think we'll continue to learn.
No, I think we're really sort of interested and keen to see how that works in a true partnership, but having that respect at the same time. But look, I think we're nearly coming to a bit of a close here on what we've been covering off. Any sort of other key final messages from you, Steph, in terms of like it is a big collective of colleagues who are out there, and because often people look, the decision makers up there, they're just plucking things out of midair. But I think you've given us a good description today of particularly how you're connecting and communicating and listening to people, but there still is that really strong science evidence as best as you can underneath it all. Yeah,
that's it. And so, probably a final comment to everyone out there would be, it is important work that we're all doing. Everyone has not their place in it, but their opportunity as well. And amongst all of that, to either inform policy, I think you'll see more and more of us doing that. So I think that will only get stronger as the expectations on government to have community accepted policies. And from my perspective, they're the ones that last. So the more we partner together, I think the stronger and the more long-standing the policies are. So we've got a better chance of getting it right. Maybe not the first time, maybe the second time, but hopefully the first time.
But it's sort of like a jigsaw that sometimes you have to pull apart and then put back together. And when you put it back together, it's just that little bit stronger. And I think, look, we're going to come to some questions in a moment that you can sort of build on to the rest of your team. So look, it's sort of been a slightly different format that we've had today, but I'm glad we've been able to do it. So thanks for your time.
No worries. Thanks, Pete, and thanks for accommodating me in a different way today.
That's okay. Okay, we'll head back into the room. Thanks, everyone.
There you go, everyone. I hope that felt engaging. I know I had the privilege to be sitting there with Steph there for that 30 minutes, and it definitely was an easy thing. We were expecting to stop and start, but believe it or not, that was just one that was one conversation from the beginning to the end. So I think it highlights a little bit of the passion that Steph has for the role that she does, and the approach that she's trying to take in the work she does. So look, it's been good to see a few comments pop up in the chat, and there's a nice one from the get-go that Graham Webb, colleague from up in the Sunshine Coast, the council there, has posed when I think Graham was just looking at the structure of the strategy and was impressed that some of the things about, you know, ecological values and connecting with First Nations was sort of the first things that were considered, and then the economic and water security came next. So I don't know, Michelle, whether is that by design, or like I suspect they're all important, but it was an interesting observation Graham made. I don't know if you had a thought.
Thanks, Pete. Yes, thank you for accommodating Steph's video. I think it worked well. I'm joined today with Joel, my colleague. I was one of the authors of the Queensland Water Strategy, and what we really saw, to Steph's point, was an opportunity. Government can't own all these problems or opportunities. We need to do them collectively. So when we got, I think the whole process of engagement with our key stakeholders was probably about 6 or 7 workshops we did over last year. And so lots of discussions about what goes first as a priority versus what goes last. So we ended up, obviously, what we saw as a really strong statement was our First Nations engagement and how we engage with our communities respectfully. Our Director General, Linda Dobe, has stood up a whole team to look at First Nations engagement. And Joel is leading lots of the work on our cultural values and how we interpret that into all sorts of legislation, including our water plans. So for us, the strategy is the overarching document. What we're wanting to really demonstrate to the industry and to the sector is we have a roadmap that will list out clearly, that attaches to that 20-page document, what we're going to be working on for the next 12 months. And so for anybody that's here today saying, where could we work in with some of the projects? They're our key projects from a department perspective, and we're wanting to give transparency to those to the sector. So we encourage you, if you're needing more information on those, certainly reach out to myself or to Joel after this session. But equally, we'll be reporting back, and we're going to be transparent back to industry on what we've achieved in that 12 months. So it is a very different approach, but that's because our Director General is passionate about making sure that we're working with industry in the sector.
No, that's okay. So the roadmaps, you're saying, Michelle, that's something that complements, or because I know
Yes.
inside there's definitely some example focus, but there's obviously more.
There is, and I guess our BAU was our water plans, Peter, and so our water plans then will be sort of 30-40% of our work, but then there's lots of other work that we're doing, including our First Nations strategy work. There's within those delivery focus areas, we have lots of different projects that sit within those, and we are working on measuring that at the moment, making sure that we're tracking that we'll have those delivered. We've looked at October or the end of the year as being our deliverable, so a little bit longer than 12 months. We've got an election in the middle of that, so after the election, you'll hear from us again on what we've been able to achieve, how many water plans we've delivered, as well as key strategic projects. For example, a piece of work that Joel's leading, which is the Southeast Queensland Regional Agricultural Water. Oh, Joel, I think I've mucked up the name of the project, apologies. But the Regional Ag Study, which will have a look at in Southeast Queensland, the first time that we've done this project, looking at ag in Southeast Queensland and what are the opportunities for us to support growing agriculture and the key food bowls in Southeast Queensland.
Okay, well that's an interesting segue across to Joel then, maybe. Like, Joel, for an initiative like that, like you've got quite a bit of profiling to do there on agriculture, Southeast Queensland. Like people might say, it's a pretty busy part of the state. Yet I suppose I've got an agriculture science background, so I'm a bit biased. So I think it's good that we're making plenty of space for food on our doorstep anyway. But how's that working for you, Joel, to literally bring together? Again, it's this in terms of colleagues who are here today, like, there's some maybe custodians of some of this key information. Like, what's the process look like for you to harness all that insight and experience?
Yeah, and that you're actually touching on the probably the hardest bit of the project in these early phases. So we're trying to do this Southeast Queensland focused agriculture regional water assessment, and bringing all that information together when it's in, bits over here, bits over there, submissions with local government strategies around agriculture, the documentation that's gone through NRM planning. There's some of this group may be aware of the drought hubs. So there's been these drought hubs, innovation hubs, which are about drought resilience in various parts of the nation, facilitated through Australian government investment. So I guess that's what the project is focused on in these initial phases is identifying where all this information exists and trying to activate the conversations to bring that through to a central point where we can then have a long list of what are the priority initiatives when it relates to water security and agriculture, and also water sustainability and efficiency in Southeast Queensland. And then how do we prioritise that? So that's the challenge that's in front of us. We've only got a 12-month time frame that we're working with that body of work for Southeast Queensland. And some of this ties in also with bigger initiatives that have been talked about in the past, and the Western Corridor and works in the Lockyer. So we're trying our best to tie all this together, bring it forward in a cohesive way, and then reflect it back to key stakeholders. And that includes our stakeholders at a regional level within Southeast Queensland, but then also at some point coming back to the technical working groups and stakeholders, such as many of the people involved in this forum, who will want to understand, how did we get to this point? Did you factor in all the priority needs for agriculture in Southeast Queensland? And did you shortlist those appropriately? And are we moving forward in a positive direction? So it's difficult. We're still doing the detailed project planning for this project, but we don't have much time, so we've got to get on with it.
Oh, look, it sounds like you've opened the door anyway to an issue that's often been hard to fully answer, so that's good. And look, the way you prioritise things is always open to different perspectives of what's more important, but at least it sounds like you've got something to keep it transparent. Just a quick question from Paula. She was wondering, other food bowls in the state up in the Bowen, the Burdekin, far north, and Bundaberg, like, will they sort of come up as well? Like, I can sense the Southeast Queensland one because, again, there's sort of a bit of a healthy contest, if I put it in that way. But in some of those regional areas, what's the status there?
So there's regional water assessment processes happening right throughout the state at the moment. So I'll drop that in the chat, is the regional water assessments, and agriculture is an important part of that, wherever it may be. So those areas, the Burdekin, far north, Bundaberg, my understanding, I'd have to double check on Bundaberg, but there are active water assessments happening in those areas. For Southeast Queensland, the focus is particularly around agriculture because of the relationship with the city deal. So as part of the Australian government's investment in the city deal, part of that is securing the food supply for Brisbane. So because of that link, we've been able to activate some resourcing, and the Queensland government is contributing an in-kind contribution towards the agricultural assessment as part of the broader city deal investment that's part of a federation funding agreement with the Commonwealth.
Yeah, okay, let's give it a bit. Okay, excellent. Just thinking,
If anyone has questions they want to just ask out loud, feel free to join the conversation with your voice.
Yeah, no, it's not like it. Just sort of looking back at a few. Thanks, Joel, for putting some of those links up. But Greg
Pete,
Clay,
can I just compliment Joel's answer? In addition to the regional water assessments,
yeah,
and we'll pop the link up, separately we have a project within the department that's called the Strategic Water Infrastructure Plan and Pipeline, and affectionately known as the SWIP. So in Steph's presentation, she talked about QBOS, the transition of QBOS from the current state to the Queensland Water Strategy, but it's actually transitioning into two documents. The first document being the Queensland Water Strategy, the second document being the SWIP. And so that infrastructure piece of work is being done in a separate area in the department, but what they're doing in that as well is just reviewing what are the future agricultural needs. So what are the crops of the future that we're going to be seeing in those areas, particularly the Burdick and Bundaberg. And they've done a piece of work that then will help shape what investment we'll need in the future. That particular piece of work, the SWIP, is due to be launched towards the end of this year. And we can keep your members updated on that progress.
that'd be good. Like I can't help but in listening to these conversations realise that obviously your agency, called Department of Water for something short, is taking maybe a lead role, but it overlaps with other areas, like the whole agricultural area. Like I can imagine even land use planning and local government. Like that's often been a really hot potato issue for preserving high quality ag land. And so some of these initiatives that you're jumping into, it has a much broader set of, I suppose, government stakeholders, let alone the different stakeholder, industry stakeholders as well.
Yes, correct. And that's why governance is really important, that Steph spoke about. It's really important we have internal, agency stakeholder groups as well as external stakeholder groups. So for the development of the Queensland Water Strategy, we equally had a group of 20 odd internal agency reps that then making sure that we were considering all of those that were affected by decisions that we were putting into, or the theme or the language that we were putting into that strategy. Interestingly to note, the key that came out of all of our engagement from external stakeholders is that water's really difficult, and there's not one champion department for water because it does sit across so many agencies. So we're hoping that the Queensland Water Strategy will be the champion of water, and we've certainly started lots more interagency groups where we're working on complex issues. One, for example, the lower Burdick and rising groundwater, that again has responsibilities in DES as well as our department. So we've got a problem that's been around for 30 years of rising groundwater. We've got a complex group of external stakeholders, but we need to co-own this together as a state across multiple departments. So that's a new way that we're looking at things differently and trying to find solutions to some of these complex issues.
Yeah, and as an example, it's interesting. I don't think she's online, but I know Lucy Redding, who's going to be one of our fourth speakers. She's physically been doing some research and monitoring up there in the Burdekin. So I think our concept of all the different like just trying to understand it and monitor it and characterize it is also a key to the equation. But to flip things around, Greg Clayton had made a comment about, or maybe more of an observation, that I suppose just the role that Steph as a director in the team is looking at sort of science information. And Greg, I suppose, you make the comments about listening, being adaptive and inclusive, like it's like you've been in this role yourself once. Like you're not saying that people are doing it different these days, but I'm not knowing how you've approached things. These were characteristics that you used yourself, but that must help that must help open the doors or get a more complete picture. Is it what? Any further comments there?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And yes, I was and the executive director, strategic water initiatives, 15 or more years ago or whatever. But my comment was really along the lines of the necessity for that pursuit of openness and transparency, information and knowledge sharing, respect, building trust. My little mantra was this journey of joint discovery that you go on in these things. And really that applies to probably to all elements of the modelling circuit, since this is about, we're talking about the modelling pipeline or the modelling circuit here, recognising the feedback loops and these communication and involvement requirements. And yeah, all of that, of course, has to be underpinned by solid science, proper consideration of the evidence, including the uncertainties in that evidence, and how to manage the risks associated with either those uncertainties or the risks to the resources or to the economy or to social or environment, whatever the case may be. So I think that's, all of that approach has been pretty positive and heartening in many ways.
Yeah, and like you say, it's a discovery process in a way. Like, in its true essence, a lot of science can be about discovery, or using some of the classic techniques. You're either trying to prove or disprove some of the things you're trying to do. So it's not necessarily having sort of totally premeditated views on the result. So how we, like in this sort of current age, like there's lots of information out there, and we certainly know the debate about truths and half truths, but I suppose in a more contemporary way, that I think the role, and I think that's one of the interesting things about this sort of particular collection of colleagues today, is that we all can offer something into that diversity of the conversation, and how we can, I suppose, some people have a deeper knowledge and expertise, but then what does that mean when you're sitting beside an industry stakeholder who goes, hang on, we have a history where things were maybe a little bit different. So it's not necessarily a contest, but it's about how you try and understand the application of a lot of the science information. But I think you're flagging that's the sort of thing that now the role of a decision maker in government is to be able to have to do that. I think it's not rushing to a quick answer, which I think we all know can have its sorts of challenges.
And I think it's important for people in Steph's position in policy and strategy to be able to bring and understand the diversities of views, to have that rich picture of the issues of the matter that they're trying to either move forward with or develop a future for, and you get that rich picture by bringing in those diversities of views, of looking at a matter from the various different angles, and what does that mean, and coming to communicate and understand those perspectives. And it's also important because that allows you to stress test your policy or your strategy with those different views and attitudes and impacts that they have, those different views and impacts have. It's important part of the whole process.
Build advocacy as well, Greg. It's really important that the sector become advocates to work alongside us and talk about, for example, the Queensland Water Strategy. We had many of our stakeholders talk externally about the strategy because they were part of building it. So yes.
And in fact, Steph even used the word that, like, it's really the strategy is nearly like a partnering initiative. So it sounds like you've got ownership for some bits of it by either non-government bodies or other sectors who are using it. And I think that's an interesting, as a decision maker in government, it's not necessarily always about government having to do things, I think. And so for people to appreciate that's important. And like, Joel, what's interesting with you say it's a 1-year project for the Southeast Queensland sort of agriculture future, so to speak, but maybe it's just the start. Like it's looking at, I suppose, some of the key issues initially, but then how do you use a project like that to keep things ongoing as time progresses, or like if the new sort of recycled water or sort of manufactured water gets back into play, what does that look like into the future? So you've got.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and essentially, even though we're talking about a 1-year project, you're exactly right, Pete. It's about this body of work needs to fit into a bigger picture. So that's, I'll admit there's some weaknesses with being attached so closely to the SEQ City deal in terms of, there's a lot more levels of consideration, approvals of documents and all that sort of stuff associated with the City deal. But one of the big opportunities I'm reflecting on personally through this body of work is because it's tied to the City deal. That's a 20-year package of investment that has agreement from all levels of government. And this project, yes, it's only 1 year, but it's at the front end of that, and it's going to be identifying priority works that may go to detailed business case stage, and the opportunities are obvious for linking that into that 20-year program of infrastructure investment. So to have water as a critical component of that, and water for agriculture, I think it's an amazing opportunity for this region. And as Michelle highlighted earlier, this assessment of the agriculture needs specifically in relation to water security and supply going forward, it hasn't been done for quite some time. So keen to make sure it's a quality piece of work that can inform appropriate decision making. Yeah.
But from a discipline point of view, though, it is interesting about, where some of the skills are and expertise in terms of understanding, for a while, there's a lot of work done looking at ecological values of waterways. Now we're looking at cultural values, and sometimes we sort of flip back to things like agriculture. I know there's a bit of a discussion in the background about renewable energy. So hydrogen's looking after some water assessments. So we've got a few different, I suppose, the expertise to do those evaluation and the science or the profiles to bring that together is just ongoing. That there's a diversity just in the science expertise that we need to really deal with.
Yeah, that's
right.
You're exactly right, and I think my background more broadly is natural resource management.
Yeah.
And over the years, the priority goes from climate change, threatened species, biodiversity values, all those things right across the spectrum. Regardless, though, it's not, from my personal experience, it's not about sacrificing one for the other. It's very much about recognizing that we're moving forward with our understanding, and these bodies of work are going to continue to need to be done. So agriculture and water supply to meet the needs and the future is definitely a priority. And I'm speaking frankly, where at my fingertips right now, I don't have all the answers, and this study probably won't generate all the answers either, but it's going to get us in a much stronger position in understanding the needs for that sector going forward. And that then will hopefully drive investment. And that's going to change. This, it's agriculture at the moment, and it will be other things in the future. But I think it's exciting. It's exciting, as I said, to be tied to this City deal package of investment and have the Queensland water strategy as well, highlighting an integrated approach to water management right across the state.
And I suppose it does flag one of the role of government is that when there can be some joint government, coming together, then I think, the broader community will appreciate that, local, state, federal, I think it's a real positive if we're being totally independent of which level of jurisdiction, but it's all working together, so that's a win.
And to be frank, this body of work also probably wouldn't have been possible without the strong advocacy from multiple local governments and the agricultural sector itself, we wouldn't be in this position to drive this comprehensive body of work forward. So that's been really valuable.
Okay, look, folks, we're reaching towards the end. Like I can see Ken Waldrum's online from Stanthorpe, and I know Ken's been having some other sort of similar discussions in his part of the world, but maybe it's a conversation for another time about. I'd love to hear more, Ken, about how things are down your part of the world, because there was this sort of healthy tension between some realistic sort of sources of water and what it meant for I suppose the viability of sort of the granite belt and other issues to do with tourism and ecological values as well. But I think, again, the role of science, the modelling, the data all help underpin how we can look at these things nicer. Michelle, you wanted to say something? No.
I know, just to Ken's point, there's another project we're working on at the moment that I'm happy to talk with you offline, which is to look at more so urban water risk. And the Stanthorpe's part of that discussion for us at the moment. So we're in phase 1, which is having a look at water quality, water quality, service delivery, and water security are 3 themes within that project. So initially is looking at what are the risks that councils are managing, and how can we as state government support councils to prioritise investment to mitigate those risks. But as I said, it's initially looking at urban water, but naturally we're getting scope creep with some of this as well. So, but yeah, keen to have a chat offline if you want, Ken. I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to connect you guys together. Ken just made some nice little comments there. So, yeah. Okay.
Thanks for that. I also just wanted to make a comment about that long-term investment that perhaps, I feel like Joel's made a real point about the cities deal and how much that's helping to, continue this sort of partnerships and approach. I wonder if it sounds almost like what your answer there, Michelle, working with the governments, local governments, to help build that type of longer term investment. Is that where RDMW is sort of stepping into that to help drive longer term investment?
I think so investment, there's a couple of different ways that we can support councils. So if you're looking at certainly urban water drinking, yes, councils, that's their remit. However, they quite often will come to the state to build as a proponent to seek national water grid funding. So how can we support councils with their planning, with their asset management, that whole cycle of managing drinking water and sewerage. And we certainly have a role there with, obviously we're the regulator with that as well. So, but then we've got the role around regional economic development and the ag. So where can we invest to support regional economic development? So some of that work sits in our colleagues, the regional economic team and manufacturing team. But we really see this as the next 10 years are really exciting. We have an amazing Director General that has a very different outlook to how we should be working with the sector and with industry. And back to the point that I think Steph and I really tried to reiterate through this is that we can't do this on our own. We need to do it collectively together. So we will be in the future inviting industry to come and meet with us. And I know our Director General did this, I think, in 2019 or 2020, but there'll be an open invitation to come in to meet the department. We're quite a small department, the water side of it, believe it or not. I think it's about 250, 300 staff. So yeah, and our remit is really broad. So what the Queensland Water Strategy was trying to do is just explain what we're doing in this space of water, because obviously it's really easy to say no one's thinking about water security for our communities, but we are. And we're looking at it strategically to make sure that we're not doubling up, we're working collaboratively. If there's great ideas sitting in universities, 9 times out of 10 will be across that and including that into our projects as well.
Yeah, water's sort of a universal custodian role, I think. It doesn't matter where you are. But look, I think that's a bit of a nice segue to actually our next guest next month, where I know Mal Shepherd and some of the work they do at Sunwater, they have serious business cases they have to use to justify some of their projects and ongoing. So that sort of financial element, a key one there in his sort of water utility area. So it'll be interesting to explore that a bit more. But folks, just thanks very much for your interest, particularly for those who have stayed on. It's been some nice comments in the chat about people going away with more food for thought, and yeah, and thanks, Graham. Yeah, I agree. The network, we learn, but we need to feed back as we go around, is definitely something we're trying to encourage. So look, folks, we'll be sharing the recordings, the links to all the chat, the comments in the chat will be there too. So many thanks for your interest. I'll stay on for a little bit, but if you need to go, please do so. And thanks for joining. And to Michelle and Joel, thanks for being part of the broader Steph team. And that was a good teamwork done. So much appreciated.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
And let's keep in touch, everyone. Look forward to being involved in your future events. Okay, cheers.